Oh, I feel so special. So, good morning from where I am, but good afternoon to you and where you are. My name is Ciyadh Wells. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm currently the director of individual giving at Austin Classical Guitar, a music education and social service nonprofit here in Austin, Texas. In addition to that, I'm currently a DMA candidate at the University of Georgia studying guitar performance, where my work in research is about Black women composers for the guitar. Because yes, there are many of them, and I would like to write and share about their work. But I think I'm here today mostly to talk to you about, go dogs, yes, go dogs. I'm here to talk to you today mostly about my work with the Institute for Composer Diversity, and also with another resource that I helped to start, Guitar Music by BlackComposers.com. And so I guess I will share screen and kind of walk you through each of these resources and show you what they look like and my involvement with them. I joined the Institute for Composer Diversity last year, and it has been a very interesting and exciting time as the resource has grown. And we've also made a lot of what I believe are really positive changes for the music community broadly. But what this institute is and what this resource is, it is a database to help everyone in the music community locate more music and to find out about composers whose identities have been historically underrepresented within the broader space that is music, particularly classical music and adjacent kind of art forms. Our resource was created in mind to really assist with educators like all of us here today, but also with people who work in programming, with the hopes that it ultimately impacts audiences and musicians, of course. So what we have is kind of two primary resources at the Institute for Composer Diversity. We have a composer diversity database, which is also linked to a works database. And so the composer diversity database is what it sounds like. It is a database of composers and their biographical and demographic information. So you can click here and it will take you to this page, and you can say, I'm interested in locating a work by a living composer who identifies with the LGBTQIA2 plus community, who is also identifies as Black and has composed something for wind band. And then you can go down here and you can search, and it will come up with this randomized list of composers who fit that particular set of criteria that you searched. So these are just the composers. And as I mentioned, the other kind of, this is also linked to the works diversity database, which is a database of the composer's works. And right now, this currently includes works for orchestra, wind band, art song, choral music, and I believe that's it for right now. We're working on a chamber database, which will include chamber music and solo music. But that is something that we're working on and will come to fruition probably the next year or so. The second primary thing that we do at the Institute, in addition to this, is analysis. And so there is a small team of people who work at the Institute who take programming season from mostly orchestras, I believe is what they're focused on now. And they look at them and they say, okay, a certain percentage of your work was composed by white men. a certain percentage of your work was composed that you performed was composed by Black women, and they take it and they do analysis and they kind of stack it up side by side. So you can use this resource to say, hey, I'm interested in how the orchestra in my community is doing in terms of diversity. You can search it, you can look it up, and you can see that there are some orchestras who are programming really amazingly and are doing a good job at representing their communities and the depth that is within the music community and the classical music repertoire. And there are some orchestras who are not quite there yet. And so we hope to be able to assist them in any way with finding repertoire and to getting to know more living composers, especially so that they can work together and do commissions and things like that. Like I said, though, I am a guitarist, a performer at heart. And so I learned that I needed to be a part of this kind of database collection research work in a way that was gonna be personally impactful for me as a musician and for the guitar community broadly. And so last year, along with another partner of mine, we started Guitar Music by Black Composers.com, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is this website, this kind of one landing page here. And it is a database that we are constantly upkeeping that features works for guitar and other plucked string instruments by Black composers. And so you can go to this website, you can open the link, and it will take you to this particular website, which displays or shares the composer's biographical and demographic information. So, the composer's gender, name, the work, links to purchasing, listening, and all of that sort of stuff. And it is divided up in these particular categories. So those are the two resources that I work on most closely. And it has been a lot of fun to get to do this work. And I, as a guitarist, I was really interested in this work because I would go and ask my teachers and ask my friends, have you played pieces by Black composers for the guitar? And, they would say no. And there was also there weren't too many people who were interested in kind of trying to do the work to find these composers, because I didn't want to believe that they didn't exist, because of course we know that that's not true. And so it's kind of been my mission to make sure that everyone knows that these composers do exist and that their music is wonderful, and that we should be making sure that they are included on all of our programs. So the vision for each of these resources is to just continue to serve. And one of the things that we've kind of changed at the Institute for Composer Diversity is how composers are represented in our database. And so as we as a society move forward and we change terminology and just general practices around how we do things, we as an institute are really committed to doing that work. And so it used to be in the past that someone could enter a composer's information on their behalf, but now through lots of really great feedback from our community, we've decided to kind of switch, and no one's work is in any of the databases without their expressed prior consent. And that has been a really big step forward for us. And at Guitar Music by Black Composers, we employ the same kinds of practices. We don't share anyone's information who doesn't already want to be shared and who doesn't feel comfortable with being in our database, because we realize that not all composers or artists feel the same way about these types of resources, and that's totally okay. You know, it is up to us to try to be the best stewards of everyone's information and to represent them in the best way possible. And so we are always continuing on that mission. I think another thing that we're always really urging everyone to do is to use databases and resources like this as your step zero. You know, deciding that you're going to, on this one program, perform one work by a Black composer or by a Latinx composer or anything like that, it is really important. That is not the end all of dismantling white supremacy, of making sure that we live in a justice-filled society. And so what we really hope is that people use our resources as a way to start conversations with the composers and also with their communities about what they can do to really be, you know, more diverse, more inclusive, and all of those types of things. So that's what we hope for the future, is that this is not your last stop, but that this is kind of the step zero or step one in what is going to be a continuing and evolving journey into creating a really inclusive environment in our music community. So I don't see any questions, but if you have them, you can put them in the chat now, or I think we're going to have room for a discussion later, and I would be happy and elated to answer any questions that you have about either of these kinds of resources then. Thank you.
Thank you, Ciyadh, very much for that. I've been taking notes and I will second that we will have a chance at the end of this session for a group discussion. And so you can use the chat to pose questions as they come up, but we will have time at the end of this for us to dig deeper into that. So I am now going to hand it over to Paula. And there you go.
Hi everyone, nice to see you today. Thanks so much for being here. I just put a link in the chat if you'd like, and I'm also going to share my screen. I'm a harpsichordist and an organist and a music theory professor and a historical music researcher based in Baltimore, Maryland. This fall I'll be starting a new job as assistant professor of music theory at Peabody. I was previously teaching at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I've been teaching music theory extensively for the past 5 years. I'm also a harpsichordist and an organist, and my other research focuses primarily on writing about ugly women performing in the 17th and 18th centuries on stage. So I'm really interested in looking at the reception history of the first two generations of women who performed music professionally in the public spotlight, and how the way that they were received has now sort of translated into the ways that we still talk about women on stage today. I'm going to share my screen with you. I am the creator of expandingthemusictheorycanon.com, which you can see here, and I also put it in the chat, so if you get bored during the rest of my talk, you can just play around on the website. I launched this resource in January, and it immediately went internationally viral. It's being used in 51 countries right now, which is really exciting to me. And I set this up essentially to be a way to counter the complete lack of gender and racial diversity in all of the music theory textbooks that are most prominently used in classrooms across the US today. And so I set it up so that it's really structured to be like a plug and play for any theory curriculum that you might be teaching that teaches Western classical music theory. So your fundamental concepts, melodic embellishments, harmonic progressions, formal structures, and then the 20th and 21st century component is coming this summer. It's almost done, but it's not ready for public viewing at this time yet. But the way that it works is, let's say that you wanted to teach a class on cadences for your students. You would go to the cadence page. All of the different types of cadences are linked here. And let's say that you wanted to teach a perfect authentic cadence. And so I have multiple examples here that you can choose from to use. And let's say that you perhaps wanted to use this example by the French composer Joseph Boulogne. You could click here. There's a downloadable excerpt that's a PDF ready to use, project straight up into your classroom, that has the example there with a short little bio. I've been really conscious on the website of wanting to not just show the musical examples, but to have these composers become just as much a part of the canon as Bach and Beethoven and Mozart and Schubert have been. And then back on the regular part of the site, you can also link to the full score of the manuscript on IMSLP. A recording is linked whenever there's been one available. One of my next projects is applying for lots of grant funding to try to get professional recordings because most of the pieces on the site haven't been recorded yet. And then I also wrote a composer bio for each composer featured on the site. I'm going to talk a little bit more about these bios in a while and why I was so conscious of wanting to do extensive biographical writing about each person, partially because I want, again, these names to become familiar, and also because the biographical writing sources that we have, like in Grove, for example, are actually really terrible in terms of the way that underrepresented composers are spoken about in general. So I've been really conscious of those things. I'm also working on a feature where you'll be able to search for the works by each individual composer from their bio page so that you'll be able to cross-reference in that kind of a way. I'm going to share something different now with you because I want to talk about lots of statistics actually, and why I decided to create this specific platform. So, here we go. So the pedagogical resources used in general to teach music theory have continued to almost exclusively privilege the experiences and accomplishments of white men. And this is even though we've had 30 years of really, really good feminist scholarship and a much more recent recognition of racial inequities within our field. All of the textbooks that we're using to teach music theory and even a lot of music history have remained really stagnant. So you can see the 7 most used music theory textbooks in the US contain a total of 2,930 musical examples, and only 2.15% of those examples are by women, and 1.67% are by composers of color. And the majority of the musical examples used in these books are by the same 8 canonical classical composers: Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, Robert Schumann, Schubert, Brahms, Haydn, and Mozart. And so these resources really, I think, have been perpetuating racist and sexist fallacies that historical women and composers of color were not writing music worthy of inclusion in the Western classical music canon, even though, of course, those people were writing really, really excellent work. And so part of my research has been showing, right, they were there all along, they were writing great music, and we've erased them, and we need to put them back into the narrative. And so as I was teaching, I found all of this to be really frustrating and disheartening, because so much of the good scholarship that has been done on historical women and composers of color remains in paywalled academic journals or in expensive books that have been inaccessible to most students. And so if pedagogical materials don't change, then students aren't exposed to this wealth of music written by historical women and composers of color. And then in turn, of course, those students are going to become the next generation of professional musicians and educators, and they're going to continue passing on those same incorrect assumptions. And so, I snarkily wanted to have the tagline on my website not say an inclusive collection of music theory examples, but to say they were there all along, music school lied to you. But I decided to stay really positive because I wanted lots of people to use the site and not be put off by my snarky humor. So the side effects of pedagogical resources that lack diversity can be far-reaching, as we all probably know. A colleague of mine recently became entangled in a YouTube comment debate on a live stream of Martin Roscoe's performance of piano music by Franz Schubert. And my colleague is familiar with Roscoe's recording of music by the American composer Amy Beach and the British composer Rebecca Clark. And he commented that he was disappointed that the program was not more inclusive of diverse composers. And within minutes, a viewer wrote, "We must assume that you are joking about the program." And my colleague said he wasn't joking, and then immediately the viewer wrote back and said, "The music of Schubert has stood the test of time. The color of his skin and his sex or gender have nothing to do with the quality of the music. There may indeed be better music by Schubert, but even his less good material is worth repeated hearing. I have my doubts that the works of Ms. Beach and Miss Clark will be quite so successful, but neither you nor I will be here in 200 years to find out." As you might imagine, the conversation totally spiraled downward from there, but this argument that canonical works have stood the test of time is really familiar, and it begs the important question, I think, of what structural systems enabled masterpieces by great white male composers to stand the test of time. In the introduction to her new book, Mediocre, The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America, which I highly recommend to any of you, I just finished it, is amazing. Ijeoma Oluwa asserts that we should not be surprised by contemporary injustice and systemic inequities because our social systems are working according to design, and everything in our society is centered around preserving white male power, regardless of white male skill or talent. Before anyone logs off and thinks that my next sentence will be that Bach or Beethoven was mediocre and that we shouldn't study them, don't worry, that's not the purpose of my website or of anything that I have to say. I think that, our canonical composers were brilliant, but they've been glorified to an almost godlike place of prominence, and they constitute just such a small portion of the story of Western classical music's development. Classical music in much of the 20th and 21st centuries has been dominated completely by this core, not just in classrooms, but also in concert programmings. Bachtrack.com reported that 13% of the 20,535 classical concerts they listed in 2019 featured a work by Beethoven. And all of this starts to give the illusion, right? I have the canonical composers up here from textbooks again. This all starts to give the illusion that the canon is an immutable entity, that it was birthed in the 19th century, and that it's kind of permanently shackled to our musical heritage. But if we think historically about how the canon developed, it actually fluctuated significantly at different times and in different places. And prior to the 18th century, it was rare for music to be performed more than a decade after a composer's death because patrons were employing new composers to keep writing new pieces rather than playing historical music. The initial impetus to revive what was called ancient music arose in England in the late 17th and early 18th centuries. And there was the Academy of Ancient Music and the Concerts of Ancient Music. And there was this sort of belief that looking back to great music of the past was a way to speak out against commercialization in the music industry and return to better or less corrupt times in England. And this spread throughout Europe, and of course then it was conflated with the idea of an obsession with great male heroes and educating people about great musical men of the past, especially in the work of people like E.T.A. Hoffman. And then, of course, concert programming reflected this. Concert programming used to be made up almost entirely of music by living composers, and in 200 years, essentially, as you can see in these graphs, concert programming switched over to being almost exclusively music by dead and canonical composers. And so all of this really shifted our way of thinking about music and the canon in this span of 200 years of music history that I just condensed into 30 seconds. So one of the other things that I was really interested in doing with my website was creating an open source platform to make sure that students in my classroom were able to see composers who were represented in the class who looked like themselves. I started teaching theory 5 years ago at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and I looked at my Theory 1 class and I was so excited because I saw diversity in every way that you could imagine diversity, and that's something that honestly in my conservatory training I had not seen, and I was really excited to say, like, the face of classical music is perhaps changing. Finally, it's time. And then I looked at the textbooks, and they were all full of examples by only white men. Even the living composers were only white men. And that was really frustrating to me. And, countless studies have, shown that representation in textbooks has an impact on a student's view of themselves and on the world. And so I also recently did a study this spring to look at the classroom attitudes that implicitly and explicitly justified the exclusion of women and composers of color in history and theory classes. And these graphs show the demographics of the people who responded to that survey. I had 108 respondents from mostly across the US, which was really exciting. These are some of the responses I received about the exclusion of women composers. No music theory class I have taken has ever mentioned a female composer, and I've taken many, many theory classes. It was repeatedly implied that women weren't writing music historically. I also remember being told that women were not capable of writing major works. As a composer myself, this affected my concept of my own skills for years. And here are the responses about the exclusion of composers of color. As an African American child, I was always questioning whether playing classical music was something I should be doing. Non-white students at my high school were pushed into jazz, gospel, and contemporary music much harder than white students, and they were actively discouraged from pursuing careers in classical music. As I mentioned earlier, my website is also an attempt at making a contribution to changing the way that we write about women and composers of color in biographical writing. And so to do that, I wrote a bio for each composer on the website. Grove's Dictionary of Music and Musicians, which is, was first published in 1879 and now is housed in Oxford Music Online, is sort of thought to be the standard of where we go to look for a biography. Although honestly, now I tell my students to go to Wikipedia and then check the footnotes because the writing is usually better. But the way that women are written about in Grove in particular has changed very little since 1879, which I find to be awful. It's been 140 years and we have so much great scholarship, but we haven't changed the way that we talk about women. And so, if we look at this biography of Isabella Colburn, who was a famous opera singer and also a composer, you can see in red at the bottom, this is from 1879, this is her bio. The only sentence about her as a composer is the very last sentence. She was herself a composer and has left a few collections of songs. And if we look at what I pulled up off of Oxford Music Online yesterday, she composed 4 volumes of songs. So it's almost exactly the same bio. Very little has changed. Most of the bio centers around her relationships, both sexual and artistic, with other important men in her life, and still only 1 sentence about her music, even though the manuscripts are easily accessible. No one has decided to write that extra paragraph to talk about her work. When I was creating my site, I was really fortunate to encounter very few obstacles. I had a lot of student research assistants actually from UMBC who helped with getting scans of archival materials, and they did engravings for the excerpts, which was really helpful for me. I also made the entire project while working as an adjunct professor, so I had no institutional funding, which was really difficult. However, I just accepted a position as assistant professor of music theory at Peabody, and so the first thing on my agenda is to apply for all of the grants to try to get professional recordings made, because most of the pieces on the site aren't recorded. And I have a list of about 200 composers whose music I'm going to go through over the course of this summer to just keep adding, because there's so many examples and so many composers that I haven't been able to include yet. So that's where I see this going. I also just applied for an NEH grant to make a series of video essays doing analyses of specific pieces by a selection of 12 of the composers on the site. And like Ciyadh was saying, I also think of this in terms of the field of music theory as being like step 1, right? That we need to rethink as a discipline music theory in general, and what music theory is, and the white racial framework that we've sort of made the field into. And so, diversifying our musical examples is only the first step in what I hope is kind of the next decade of our work as professional musicians and scholars of really thinking about how to dismantle systems of oppression and to take the next steps in that way. So I look forward to your questions in the discussion session at the end.
Thank you, Paula. We just had a comment that someone who has to leave is saying this is utterly fascinating, and I agree. So I appreciate what you have presented. Again, I'd like to remind everyone that will have a chance to ask more in-depth questions at the end. You're welcome to put them in the chat now or for later. But now I would like to turn it over to Rosana.
Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here and to talk about Ciyadh for inviting me. And I've appreciated a lot my two predecessors, and I think we can really contribute to changing the canon, which is one of the purposes of this gathering. I have put in the chat the link to Musica Brasilis, and I'm sharing my screen as well. Okay, so Musica Brasilis is mainly about making available Brazilian music scores on the web. The motivation for this initiative is that in Brazil, specialists think that 80% of the repertoire is still in manuscript format. We see here one example of our emperor, Dom Pedro I, which was a good composer, that is presented, belongs to an archive, which is very difficult to access because it doesn't have even a local database. So we got this image because one of our collaborators went there and made a picture. We have this very important celebration next year. We are celebrating 200 years of our independence, so it's important to make available the works of that period. Well, and we know that musicians don't go to archives, search for manuscripts when they would like to make a program concert. So it's really difficult to have Brazilian music present in concert programs. One of our major works, an opera by Carlos Gomes, Il Guarani, which is devoted to an Indian as a theme. It's out of print, the reduction for piano and voice. So it cannot be presented because you are not able to rehearse. And it is one of the major pieces of our repertoire. We know that music printing is decayed all over the world. So the solution is web availability. So, and also we know that musicians play more and more using tablets. I do that very often today. And especially as Paula knows, harpsichord players can use the foot for turning pages because we don't have pedals. So it's very practical to play on a harpsichord using an iPad or the tablet. So we are going to see a little of Musica Brasilis in some minutes, but it's an initiative I have started 12 years ago. We have 1,700 music score available with separate parts for instruments. It's written music, of course, so modern Brazilian music, the women are very, very active in funk, for example. We have Anita, which is a great music creator, music composer, but her music is not in Musica Brasilis because our focus is on written music. Brazilian repertoires of all times and genres also. We don't focus on classical music. In Brazil, it is very difficult to make a clean separation between popular and classical. Tom Jobim, who wrote Garota de Ipanema, wrote also, has written also many symphonies and chamber music. So we don't split with genre respect. We have been very gratified to acknowledge that we had 55,000 users last month. So it means we are in the right way, and we cooperate with UNESCO. Let's take a look at the website for a moment. So, can you see the website there?
Not yet.
Okay, let's go to the Zoom. I think I have to go to the Zoom and stop share and then share the other screen. That's what I have to do. Okay, I think now you'll see it, right?
Yes.
So we have this timeline here, and we go to very recent composers as well. We can also use the slider, which is here. So we have very, very contemporary composers presented there. And also we have a very diverse number of people. So we have women, we have people that are not white, and we have here number of the most accessed scores. So we see a mix of popular composers like Hermeto Pascoal and classical composers like Carlos Gomes or Alberto Nepomuceno. We can also see that there are several periods, but we cannot see any women there. But if we go to the composers page, we have this little sign here, and we can filter for some of our major composers written music. As I tell you, the most active women composers nowadays do not write their music, so they're not there. But we have Jocy de Oliveira, which is one of our major classical composers. She has been working with Berio, and her music is very much performed in Europe. And I will invite you, it's not still translated into English, but we have, I promise you, after this meeting, we are going, first thing, my collaborator Nivea, which is listening to us, tells me it's a pity it has not been translated to English. Jocy makes a reflection about women composers. So we will, I promise you, we will translate it as soon as possible. So coming back to our to my presentation, I would like to point out some of the next steps. Slideshow, playing from current slide. Okay, so we have this already shown. So here we have the countries where Musica Brasilis has been used since last month. This picture shows last month. Last month. You can see it, I suppose, right? For the next steps concern editing 5,000 new scores in a 3-year project. It will concern mainly public domain composers. This was a request by the sponsor because they didn't want to have this rights problem involved in this project. And as I told you, we have 80% of the repertoire is still in manuscript format. So we have a lot to do with respect to dead composers. BNDES is the sponsor of this project. We have the cooperation of the National Archive that will take care of the digital preservation, the digital scores. And we have a partnership with Wiki Movement Brazil. Wiki Movement Brazil is a Brazilian chapter of Wikimedia universe. So we are putting our music scores into Wikipedia, Wikimedia Commons. Our metadata are going to Wikidata, which is nowadays becoming the concentrator of metadata from several libraries in the world. And this is important because Wikidata somehow can conciliate all the identifiers. And also it contributes to give more visibility, stability, and to allow for reuse of our scores. We have 2 examples I'd like to show you. Stop share. So I'm sharing again the website here. So we have here Chiquinha Gonzaga, one of our major female composers. We have our scores. Henrique, você está falando, Henrique. Sorry, I think my brother somehow stepped in. So you have the score here, which is from Musica Brasilis. So our scores are present in the Wikipedia page. And we also have the score in the Wikimedia Commons resource. So that's a means of making our resources more reusable. That's what I would like to say. I'm very happy to answer to questions, and I would like to invite you to browse the website, Musica Brasilis website, and also to go to our YouTube channel. We have a very nice collection of Brazilian music recorded there, and also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosana. As I hear all of our presenters, I'm getting a real sense of all of the work that goes behind these resources, and all of the work that is needed still and with that, the dedication that each of you have, and it is inspiring. I would like to present something myself that is a smaller project in comparison to these larger resources, but something that I do hope will become useful for us as music educators. So I will share my screen in just a bit, but So to give you some background, Voce Velata is in its beginning and origins a youth ensemble, and it was launched last fall. And with it, there was a component of research because of our focus was on BIPOC and women composers. And in that, so it's a youth ensemble, we put together a research task force that included a couple youth members, and as well as both Paula and Jamie, who are on this call, joined that research task force as advisors. So they led this effort towards research and finding and deciding on the repertoire that this group wanted to study for the year. And as part of that, I had to give them a place to start, so point them in the direction of resources. And I was initially actually pleasantly surprised at how many resources were out there. And Paula also was very helpful in that, in recommending some of the main resources that we ended up using. But as I began to discover these, I realized that maybe other music educators might want to use this as well. So I started to consolidate it into a list in a Word document. And as the list got longer, I started to visualize how it could then be organized to be more useful for music educators. So that's the basis for creating this resource of resources. It's for the music educator, with the music educator in mind. So let me share my screen and I'll show you now its current manifestation. Let's see here. All right. All right. So I used the platform Trello to create this resource. And just to begin, I will show you an example of what this looks like one of the entries into this resource, beginning with Rosana's Musica Brasilis. So this card has a summary of her resource. And so the idea is that if you are wanting to find something specifically that is a composer from Latin America or a composer from Brazil, you will be able to find the resources that might take you in that direction. And one of the things I discovered is that there was a lot of time I had to take to go through these resources to figure out what they offered. And I wanted to expedite that for my colleagues, my music educator colleagues, and provide a sort of chance for them to, oh, this is a searchable database. Great. This will be useful to me. And there might be other databases that are not searchable and you may not have interest. And so this is a point where you would find that out here. In addition, I have labels that provide more information about what you can do with this resource. So her resource, as she had demonstrated, has an instrument and level filter in, and there are also links to scores. That for me, for example, is a very, I think, a valuable quality or attribute to certain resources. Not all of them have linked to scores, but if that's your main interest, I want to get to the scores, I want to be able to go to a resource that can get me to the music right away, this is a label, and you can filter out in this resource the resources that only have links to scores. So that is the template for each of the descriptions of the resources. And the resource on a whole has these categories, larger categories, represented by these columns. And so composer lists, repertoire lists, a list of articles, books, and media that can be used in your curriculum development, and as well as a list of artists and ensembles, again, doing this work, involved in this work, can represent the work. This is, I would like to note, this is not exhaustive. It's very much a beginning for these, but there still is quite a bit here, and to dig through. Let's see here. I just realized I should probably share it in the chat. So let me do that. And then, let's see here if I can find the chat feature. I'll share it after I can, once I stop sharing, because I can't find the chat feature right now. But if you want to come in here and explore, where I recommend to begin actually is over here on the left there, where to begin, just so that you can get oriented as to how this is organized. I've mentioned the larger categories, but within the categories there are resource types. And so you could search by research types. There are labels, and within the different labels, there are different kinds of labels. This also has a sort of recommended places you can start based on sort of what kind of music educator you are, because there are a lot of resources out there and there are a lot of really great ones. But as I was working with these, I did sort of filter out those that I felt might be good starting points. And again, just starting points. So a lot of them are useful amongst all of these categories of music educators, but some of them more useful, for example, for, grades 9 through 12 versus K through 8. And so that is a good place to explore and start. I did want to make a comment about the labels and highlight something about the labels. So there are labels similar to the other resources that were presented today that are based on ethnicity and identity groups. But for music educators, I also have some that I felt would be very useful. So you can filter by strings, winds, vocal, guitar, piano. And then these functionality labels also, if you're interested in your curriculum development, I put a label in there. This resource would help you in that effort, or repertoire development. So if you really want to build your repertoire, professional development, if you want to work on your own, sort of expanding your own knowledge base of anti-racist work, I've put labels on that. And of course, those other two very useful ones, whether you can filter by instrument and level, because I know that can be important, or if you want to search for resources that have links to scores. So, and then one last thing, and then I would like actually to move into our group discussion because we are at that time, but a tip for searching. Trello is quirky in how you search. And so I would recommend that whether you're on your phone or on a PC or Mac, that you go to the show menu to the right, and then you use this search feature. That is where I recommend you start. And instead of using up here at the top, this search and feature up here, which is much more general. And if you're on Trello, will search all of your boards and it's not quite as useful. So use the one under the menu. And then I give more detailed instructions on how to really search in labels in the card on the left. So I hope that this continues to grow, and I am always open to and asking for recommendations on what to add into here. And I will continue. It's an ongoing project. So that is that for that resource. I would like to now move into our group discussion and remove myself from the spotlight. It should be now, you can make it as, speaker view. I don't know if I'm going to be stuck for you guys, but you can, it should be on speaker view by default, but if not, as you can adjust it. But in this space, so the idea is that this is a regular group. And in this space, I would like to sort of present a suggested set of guidelines for us as a group to continue this discussion. And the guidelines that I have are actually are borrowed from a cohort that I was involved with. So I sort of adopted what they recommended for creating safe spaces for these discussions. So let me see if I can get those up in the chat. Find it in just a moment. Where are we? Okay. So I'm just going to put these in the chat so they're there. Okay. Here we go. All right. Let me know if you see this. Oh, there we go. All right. There we go. Okay. So essentially, I'll go through this, and this might be something that we could practice if this does end up being a continuous meeting, that we can remind ourselves of these guidelines at the beginning of each meeting. But of course, approaching this space both as teachers and learners, and as we share our stories and our personal experiences, that we keep those stories within this group. And to that point, right now I am recording, but I am open to, if this discussion goes into places that that participants would rather not have it be part of the public archive of this, I can edit that out. And I'm also open to future meetings not being recorded. So leaving the stories, taking the learning. In this space, there might be two things that can be true at the same time, even though they seem contradictory. So, thinking about both and thinking and having that here. We are sharing this space, and we'll have, there is only so much time. So just being aware of how much you're sharing. We are bound to come up against things that will make us uncomfortable. And it's okay to share that discomfort. It's also okay to share the joy that we might feel in discoveries that we make together. And in that vein, we can, in this space, be vulnerable. We can take risks with what we share and what we feel and what we express. As we are listening, I know personally I have to work on this one, that we are listening to learn and not to respond. And so that is a good reminder for me, especially. And when we come across ideas that may not sit well with us, to make sure that we challenge the idea, not the person. And again, that's in the sort of collective desire for creating this safe space. So with that, I want to invite everyone. Abby actually already put in the chat, if everyone could put in the chat in a small introduction, just saying sort of what kind of educated they are and where they might be based, just a tiny small introduction as we get started. This is a smaller group, which is good. So we could also do it if you guys want to. We could go around and do those introductions verbally. But I did want to just open it up with if there were any general thoughts or things that stuck out to you in the presentations. and or themes or topics that you found particularly striking, and sort of maybe put that out there as a starting point. So the floor is now open to anyone who would like to bring up anything that has come up in these presentations.
Well, I would like to tell both Ciyadh and also Paula that I was very happy to be acquainted with their initiatives. And I realized how hard it is to make our efforts better known. I think this is an issue for everybody here. And I think that Kaja invited us because she could discover us. I don't know why, but well, this is an issue, and this consumes a lot of energy. And well, this is an issue for Musica Brasilis. So I would like to share that with you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abby. I teach middle school kids at a public school in Michigan. I think overall, I was just really impressed by how much work there is to do, how much the four presenters have put in of their like blood, sweat, and tears to get these resources available. And I want to thank all of you for doing that. Like, it's very, very important and meaningful and profound. And as I'm looking at it as an educator who's looking for resources and actively engaged in any conversation I can be in, how to use these resources to help me as a music teacher of children, I think what I'm noticing is that, and I think Ciyadh, I noticed yours had a category on it that refers to graded material. And I'd like to really stress how much work it is for music education, like young people who teach young children, to be able to sift through the amount of material there is. The publishers, I've got so many thoughts in my mind right now, but the publishers do so much to grade materials as we have them now, and that's a good starting point for us. So I just really appreciate that, Ciyadh, that you have that graded materials filter that can be wonderful for teachers of young people to be able to find music that can work with that level of sort of pedagogical or like skill-based, like how to draw in, because there's a lot of material out there, and most music educators don't even know where to start to sort of begin filtering through the amount of material that we want to know about. So thank you for that filter. I guess that I have a question. I'm just going to put this out there. It doesn't need to be answered at all, but the question is, what work are people doing? There's questions I have about copyright, arranging music for younger children. So if there's a piece, for instance, there's a ton of music out there in the music education world that's arrangements of composers. And there's all this copyright and publishing sort of, I don't know, that's the gesture I have for it, the sort of like restrictions on that, right? So the questions I have are how to navigate contacting a composer, asking if you can arrange it for younger children. Those are big questions in my mind. And the other question I have, that's a big picture question, not for anybody particular, but how do we advocate with the publishers to start doing more of this work, right? Because we're all independently working and the publishers control so much. It's sort of an imperialist model of control, right? So how do we then advocate for the publishers to be actively engaged in this work? So those are some of my thoughts. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Abby. And those are, I've noted some of the questions, and do welcome our panelists to, maybe, offer some thoughts on those. And it is another general sort of starting point question that I did want to put out there that Abby has already kind of started, and that is, what are the barriers you see and that you have already identified to that are related to these the biases and supremacy and addressing these in our work. So yes, I've noted these questions. Anyone else want to either comment on that or have other new thoughts?
I had one thought, just to give a couple of responses to that. I think you're right on about the problems with publishers being a huge gatekeeping kind of issue and controlling so much of the music. I think one way around that is, of course, to look at public domain sources. So doing arrangements of things that are more historical, where you can get an original manuscript. IMSLP has digitized just so many tens of thousands of things, and so that's one way that you can get around that issue of copyright and publishers, is to use things that are in the public domain and make arrangements from older works. But I also think that in general, if you really like the music of a living composer, now if that music has been published by a publisher, it becomes much more complicated, but if the music hasn't been published by a publisher, I think most living composers would be absolutely delighted to get an email from a music educator saying, hey, I really want my middle school orchestra to play an arrangement of X piece, but your current arrangement is great, but it's too hard for my middle schoolers. I'd like to arrange it, or I would like to commission you to arrange it, or I have someone else that I would like to do an arrangement of it, and to ask what the policy would be for doing that. And I think, they would probably charge you a fee, but the fee would be, probably about the same as what you would pay to buy a new piece of music to play, or to rent scores to play a piece, or they might not charge you at all. But I think that I can't imagine, I can't speak for everyone, obviously, but I think most composers would be really thrilled to hear from you, and they usually have a personal website that you can easily submit a contact form and see if they write back to you. But I would say not to be afraid to reach out to people whose music that you like, that you would like to have your students play, because I think they would love to hear from you, and that they'd be really excited to know their music was being played in a different context.
Thank you for that, Paula. I have a question maybe out to Ciyadh, as bouncing off of that and also rounding in or putting in Abby's, sentiments and questions. So finding a composer who can arrange for middle school students, who, understand the limitations, that could be another, that's another sort of barrier or thing to consider. And Ciyadh, I don't know if in your work, I had the sense that that the Institute for Composer Diversity really does highlight and contemporary composers, living composers, I guess. So in your relationship with them, would there be an avenue towards, sort of maybe being able to find the composers who have experience in doing arrangements for specific age groups?
I think maybe the closest thing to that is like filtering by difficulty and or grade level, which is still something that we're really trying to define and get some loose boundaries around, because what grade 1 means to you might actually be grade 5 to this person over here, even if, you know, the students are the same age and at the same, you know, point in their musical careers and journeys. And so like defining that is really hard. So I think trying to go off of, you know, what is the grade, and then also just if there's a perusal score available, using the perusal score. If it's not available, maybe asking for a perusal score. That is also an option for when you're reaching out to a composer. I think also bringing people whose strengths lie in arranging into the conversation, into the relationship, is also one way to go about it. Because like, I might not feel comfortable arranging a piece, but I might have a friend who could, with the composer's consent and permission. So that's also a way for maybe a composer who isn't really comfortable arranging and doesn't care to arrange, but is okay with someone else doing that job. So that's kind of like another way to go about it, I think.
Thank you, Ciyadh.
I hesitate to jump in here. Am I jumping in?
Go for it, Paul.
In this age of music software writing programs, I think the publisher should be a thing of the past, right? I mean, it's just one more hand to feed on its way from the creative mind to the performance. Hence, if somebody wants to perform one of my tunes, I wrote, hey, during the plague, I wrote 16 new tunes. If somebody wants to perform one of my tunes, ask me, and I'll be glad to like let it go for a fair value. That's how I would feel about the whole thing. So I'll just shut up now and listen some more.
Kaja, perhaps I would explain how we deal with copyright in Musica Brasilis. Because, well, of course, we have a large collection of public domain composers, but we are more and more having contemporary composers that look for us to publish their work on Musica Brasilis. So we are very glad to have the collaboration of these composers, and they may choose if they would like to freely make available their works, or if they would like their works to be sold. We sell music through sheet music in this case, and we split the earnings with the composers. So they may choose. So we have different kinds of deals with composers, but we realize it's very, as Paul said, it's very important to have this online availability for contemporary composers, because in Brazil, even if we have had a very active publishing industry for music in the beginning of the 20th century, where we didn't have a radio, so the only way to play music was to have a piano at a house and to play by the score. So we had that was estimated 2,000 different titles each year. So all this is out of print now. They are not printed anymore. So of course there is a lot to be done with respect to public domain, but also to open this channel for contemporary composers. And to answer to AB, we are now publishing material, educational material that is the outcome of a project by Funarte to be used for young orchestras. We have a lot of young orchestras in poor regions in Brazil, and they have started a project for hiring composers for both composing new material or arranging existent material for these orchestras. So I will be glad to put a new filter after Amy's intervention on Musica Brasilis to make these scores more easily accessible.
Wonderful, exciting to know that that is in the works.
I kind of have like an additional follow-up maybe about the publishers. Maybe it's not so much pushing the publishers or encouraging them, but encouraging the individual composers and artists to be in control of their work in a way that would allow for you or for anyone to purchase it like easier. Like I know some composers are not really set up to handle purchasing and doing it all themselves. And while that's not ideal, I do think we're kind of like moving in that direction for most of us. And I know like in my limited experience of teaching in public school, like it can be difficult for, say, I'm the teacher and I want to purchase something from an individual's website. That can like include a lot of bureaucracy and red tape on the side of the teacher. So I can understand why it would be easy for you to say, hey, I just want this to be available on the publisher's website because we already have an account with them, we submit the PO, and then it just takes care of itself. So I think maybe one way is really to think about how can we encourage composers to be set up for score rentals or things like that. And how can we be a part of helping them to do that, is what I think is like another option and way to go about that if we're thinking about publishing music.
Sounds like another another maybe tenet to this work, and a opportunity for support. There are a lot of parts of this bridge, making and filling in those gaps, and that's like one of them.
I'm just gonna throw something else out there in terms of publisher control and composers, and like what music educators in public schools are dealing with now, especially in the pandemic, are notation software programs. So something like Noteflight that the kids now have access to so they can compose their own music, which is awesome. And then they usually have a library. So Alfred Music will have a library of music that's available on their platform. And Noteflight, for instance, they have all of this library of music for band and choir, but like orchestra, maybe not so much. Or how do they, because they're all starting to build their libraries. So I guess that's just sort of, I'm just throwing that out there, because now we're not just dealing with manuscript, just like Rosana was talking about. It's not just manuscript, but it's also who controls the digital music and who's creating the library and who has access to the libraries, and why do certain people have access to it and other people don't? And has your district paid for student access to those libraries? And what is the content of those libraries? So also thinking about what is the criteria when you're looking at a library or platform and how they're representing women and BIPOC composers, so that's actually a criteria when you're looking at purchasing for your school district or your school, that be an important aspect of yeah. Anyways, there's just Ciyadh, I appreciate that you said something, because that piece of like the time that teachers have to look at databases, find a piece that they like, arrange it, contact the composer, right? All the permissions, and then get the school district to approve payment and even having funding. Like you're talking about 10 layers, and that's just like, it's just intense. So it's, yeah, thank you for saying that.
We have other thoughts.
See, that's why I didn't want to jump in. When you're sitting at home during this whole thing, I don't know how how it is in the public, you know, in the public schools. All I know is what I've been forced to do. So those were my thoughts from that perspective.
Mhm.
I appreciate the other perspectives now even more. Thank you.
Mhm. We have just a couple minutes left. Is there anyone else who would like to add to this discussion, or at least present maybe some suggested priorities of topics and that this group could address?
I would just like to mention something briefly.
Mhm.
First, that the world is indeed small. Ciyadh, I was a grad student at UGA. I did both master's and doctorate there, so go dogs for sure. And the second thing is so nice to see fellow Brazilians. I'm also from Brazil, I'm from São Paulo, and it's nice to meet all of you and hear about wonderful things that you're doing. I work for the Sphinx organization, and we have been getting a lot of traffic in our website during the pandemic. And we also have the Sphinx Connect, a huge conference every January here in Detroit. So my suggestion with the Sphinx is just to use our resources tab on our website to share your work, so we can definitely help with spreading the word about diversifying music theory with Paula's website and Musica Brasilis. We can definitely add the links there, because we always have musicians asking for ideas for programming their recitals, and we can definitely help on that end. And I would also suggest, if you can participate at the Sphinx Connect in January, it will be a huge event. It's our 25th anniversary, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot of people here. So spreading the word should not be an issue then.
Thank you for that, Anna. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up, and I would like to first of all say a big thank you to our panelists and for their time in preparing for today's presentation and for all that they shared. And I definitely am inspired by the work, and it feels like there's a momentum there that I can, sort of ride. So I appreciate your work. I appreciate your time. I also would like to thank the group that came today and ventured with Voce Velata on this launching. I appreciate your interest and your trust in this. I will be sending out a survey to everyone to ask, sort of to see if it is something that we want to do to keep this discussion going. And so, the practicalities, as well as some other questions on there to sort of see how this could go moving forward. So please do look for that. I will also email everyone the links that were shared today. So that is it. I'd like to conclude the first session of the new narrative, and thank you all for being here. I really appreciate your participation.